misting is compared to fogging are different amounts of stuff. So misting is a very light mist, but it's still rain. It's still dumping water on the animal. Fogging is you're converting water into a mist, a fog of some sort that's a little bit closer to a cloud than it is really being rained on. So
welcome back to the Animals at Home podcast. My name is Dylan Parent, and thank you so much for tuning in today. Today, I'm speaking with Sean Mcneeley, who runs McZoo Exotics, as well as the Reptile Reporter Show. Now, in this episode, we discuss Sean's background in keeping reptiles, as well as the content that he's creating with both McZoo Exotics, as well as the Reptile Reporter Show, which is a really unique idea, but reporting on the reptile shows that are happening in his area. As a Canadian, I just can't believe how many different reptile shows happen in the U.S., and we talk about that a little bit in the episode. But the meat and potatoes of this conversation is fulfilling one of the goals I had at the beginning of this year, and that was to provide more instructional content for you guys to help you, aid you in your reptile keeping journey. So just having content that when you listen to it, you go, okay, I'm able to now implement something in my reptile room or with whatever animals I keep at home. And this episode specifically is about misting and fogging. Dehydration in reptiles is one of the leading cause of reptile illness. Now, because of that, I wanted to provide something to help people hydrate their animals, and that's what misting and fogging is all about in today's episode. And I think both of those things can be used so incorrectly that it can create other problems like bacterial infections and respiratory infections and whatnot, all of what we talk about in the episode. But Sean walks us through how to set up a mister, how to use them in your enclosures, some of the intervals and timing intervals that he uses when he has them go off throughout the day, and then also how to fog many enclosures. So we talk about two different options as far as if you only have a couple enclosures, how to fog them, but also if you have a room full of enclosures, how can you fog them without having to avoid going and buying a bunch of different ultrasonic foggers. He actually has a system, a one unit that fogs everything for him. And again, this is just one of those episodes that you'll come away with good information that you can implement right away that hopefully will end up hydrating your animals better. And maybe some of you already know this information and you think, oh no, this is basic. But for those of you who are brand new to the hobby or are wanting to take the next step as far as hydration goes, then this episode will be very important for you. If you're looking for more information on this episode, make sure you head to animalsathomenetwork.com. You can find the show notes there for every episode that has ever been released on the network. Thank you so much to Custom Reptile Habitats for supporting this podcast. You can find affiliate links in both the YouTube description as well as the show notes. I am grateful for every single one of my Patreons over at patreon.com/animalsathome. If you do think the show is worth a couple bucks a month, you can support it there. Every dollar does go towards either my time, paying for editing, paying for the server space. Again, this show is not cheap to produce. It costs me, again, I mentioned it all the time, like $500 or $600 of just editing, but that doesn't include anything else as far as the equipment and all that. So it is expensive. So if you do enjoy the show and you're finding it valuable, a couple of dollars a month, if you're not going to miss it, I would be very grateful to help me, continue to keep the lights on in this room. And I think that is it. Let's jump into this episode. Enjoy. Awesome. Well, Sean, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for doing this.
thanks for having me.
I'm very excited to chat with you. One of my goals this year was to have more kind of like instructional kind of content for people. I spent a lot of time listening to podcasts from different genres, and I really loved episodes of just whatever podcast I was listening to that I really was able to pull something from and immediately implement it. So I think that's what we'll do here today with the fogging and the misting. I was hoping to give people just a good breakdown of how they can utilize those two things. But before we get into that, I have a bunch of questions along those lines. I would love to just kind of get into your keeping and your history in reptile keeping. So can you just sort of lay out the species that you've kept over the years?
Sure. So this has been a long trip. 33 years ago, I was figuring it out earlier today. I got my first iguana. My wife actually bought it for me. And so we've been together for 30 years at this August, but she got me my first iguana, and I had other reptiles, I think, before that, but this is the most memorable pet. And from that point on, it's taken off. It's scaled up. I didn't really start breeding or selling stuff until 5 or 7 years ago. But I have done that. So let's just see. I kind of put a list together so I could talk to it because it's been a
Yeah,
huge
let's hear
list.
the list.
But so chameleons, 10 different types. Actually, there's only 9 here. Brevicorn, um, Triloceras jacksoni, Triloceras quadricornis, Triloceras honelli, cristatus, pardalis, which is the panther chameleons, miners, O'Shaughnessy, which I'm just starting to work with, and Bohemi, which I now of these, the ones that I've actually bred and sold were Jacksons and Panthers. And the 2 types of Jacksons, there's the Jackson Jacksoni and there's the Jackson Xantholopus, which are the bigger, more common ones. I've sold those. I have tortoises, mostly redfoots. I have iguanas, like I said before. I've had bearded dragons, and I do have 2 currently. I've had basilics, both brown and green, and I was breeding the brown ones. I have several different types of turtles, although tortoises are also a part of the turtle family, but just turtles that you find locally, or not locally, but in United States that you can get at shelters. Most of the pets that I have, about half the pets that I currently have, are from rescues. So I get them from a place where people don't want them anymore. I think that's the best way to go, especially iguanas. Iguanas are so in need of being rescued that I always pick them up from there. My first 3 I had, was when there weren't that many out there and they weren't that available. But since that time frame, I picked all the rest of them up from shelters, so what have you. Let's see what else. Where was I at there? Geckos from New Caledonia. These are ones I purchased. Crested Chahua, Velarde, Bea robusta, which is the Velarde are the chameleon geckos. The Bea robusta, I don't even know how to say that one. Is one I just got recently, so I haven't worked with that with one for an entire month. Snakes, boas, ball pythons, corn snakes. I think I've worked with other snakes, but those are the ones that I have right now and have worked with. Isopods, I guess those aren't really reptiles, but those are things we put in the different types. And I've worked with frilled dragons and flying dragons and several other species that I couldn't remember off the top of my head. But that's the list. It's not small. Those are ones I've actually either owned or, like I told you, the biggest thing that I've been selling and have sold over time has been the chameleons. Mostly because I don't want to sell a whole bunch more. I don't want to. This is a hobby for me. The McZoo Exotics is a hobby, and so I don't want it to get bigger than it needs to be. Every time I start to think I should do this for a job, I get to myself and I think, nah, I got a great job, and so there's no reason not to continue my job. It makes me good money, and so but the hobby is the hobby, so that's where I'm at with that.
Yeah, well, that's pretty amazing. That is quite a list of different species, and I think the iguana thing is really interesting because you think about 30 years ago when you got your first one. That's kind of when they were just common pets. Like if you talk to people who started keeping reptiles 30 years ago, quite often they say their first pet was an iguana, which nowadays it's just so insane to think that people a first-time reptile keeper could walk out with an iguana, but it was really common. And I think you're right. I think rescuing, if you actually want to keep that species and have a dedicated space for it, rescuing it is the way to go because they are constantly turned over in those types of situations.
That and the larger tortoises, if you want a big tortoise, don't get it from a baby. Don't get these sulculatas at the reptile shows. Get a big one. If you want a big one, get a big one. But most of them, live 100 years. So you're going to have your grandkids taking care of it. So if you can't set that up in your family, you need to start working on it now.
Yeah, exactly. And for the iguanas, what do you keep them in? Because obviously they do become quite large.
A large room type area.
Okay.
I keep them individually. I keep almost everything individually. My tortoises I keep together because tortoises get along well. At least they appear to get along well. But the majority of the iguanas I keep individually. I did back 25 years ago keep 2 iguanas that ended up being together forever together. And that was before anyone knew anything about them being separated. They lived 13 or 15 years, so it probably wasn't that stressful on them, but I just don't keep them together. I keep them apart because that way I can figure out what they're doing, what they're eating, what their poop looks like, and what the individual is, so I don't have to worry about all the different ones having a different one of them having something like a problem in the middle.
Yeah.
And also I skipped tegus.
Oh yeah, you'll get some tegus too. So you have some pretty substantial animals, and so for the tegus and the iguanas, for that matter, I actually I'm not sure what state you're in. Are you able to keep anything outside for some of the time?
Yes, I'm in Ohio,
Okay.
northern Ohio. So outside, I can keep them outside. Some months, 3 to 6 months, I'd be able to. My current housing association probably would be freaked out if I had iguanas and tegus all over the backyard. So, although my house borders on the backwoods, it also has a very prominent spot in the housing association. So at some point, I'm going to actually have to move so I can keep all this stuff outside. The better for the reptiles, which I'm planning to do next year or so.
Okay.
But yes, I can keep them outside, but mostly, I keep them indoors. And I have a fairly large house, and I just in a large basement. It walks out into the valley type thing, which is a metro park type area. So it's fairly large. It's good for them. It's good for me. I didn't get this one. This house I've had 5 years, so this was a lot of time in coming. So it was lots and lots of different houses until we found the perfect house for me, which is like the whole basement full of reptiles and other pets and what have you, and then the rest of the house for the rest of us. So.
Yeah, it's funny how often I hear, and I'm in that same situation too, looking for homes where the first priority is the reptiles. It's like, okay, these other, a lot of the other boxes are easy to check, but then like, where are the animals going to go? Can they be kept in this area, legislatively, all these different things. And yeah, so it becomes a pretty important thing. Now, as you said, right now it's a hobby for you. It's something fun. You're enjoying it. You sometimes have the temptation to do more, but
always have the temptation to do more.
Exactly.
Every time I go to a show, I want to do more than just a hobby and do it, but I have to stop myself because I get too much to do, and I don't want to lose an animal because I didn't take good care of it. I don't want to get myself where it's no longer a fun. It needs to be something that's fun. If I feel it's a chore, then I've got too many animals and I need to farm them out to other people. Luckily, because of what I'm doing with the McZoo exotics, I can always farm them out to other people if I get too far, but I haven't found myself getting too far since I've been doing this. So
yeah, I think that's a good reminder for people too, to just have a good community around you. Like find the people in your area who keep reptiles as well, because sometimes you end up in a situation where you do have too many animals, and if you can move them along to people that you trust and that are going to care for them, it's a lot better than just like throwing them up on Craigslist as an emergency. So I think that's a really good point. And so despite the fact that you're keeping it as a hobby, you have taken on a whole other role in herpetoculture of a content creator as well,
yes.
which is a whole other thing. That's not that. It really does take a lot of creativity as well as commitment. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the content that you're putting out?
So in order to take care of my my need to be at reptile shows and something to do with them, I switched to actually going to reptile shows and reporting about them. It started off as just Bill Strand and I, who's a content guy that I knew from the chameleon enthusiasts, just trying to get the chameleon enthusiasts and people to get known by all the public. And after a couple of weeks, it turned out that he and I had a show together, and we called it Exotic Pet Adventures. And after the first 6 or 7 months, it became something more, because it was pretty much me going to reptile shows, talking to people, bringing them on the show. And so why didn't I just call it Exotic Pet or a reptile show reporter? And so I looked, and both of those, it's funny because the first one was there. Exotic Pet Adventures was actually a URL. I could get it on Instagram. I could get it on Facebook. I could do everything. And so was the Reptile Show Reporter. But the Reptile Show Reporter, in the first 2 or 3 weeks that I had that moniker and that I used that on Instagram, I got 10 times as many likes as I got for the whole Exotic Pet Adventures for 6 months. So I was like, okay, this is a good name, and we'll go ahead and do it. So now I'm going to reptile shows and I'm meeting people. I'm using what I call the 4 pillars: the attendees, the show itself, the vendors, and the potential pets as different things I talk about. And I'm posting on Facebook and in my Facebook group and on Instagram, and I'm posting all these different things that I'm seeing. And so I've taken that desire to be part of the reptile hobby, and I've morphed it into, let's not go buy all these today. let's talk to other people who might want to sell them to me, and help them find other homes for them. So it's kind of a difference there.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And we do need to thwart some of that creativity and some of that interest of wanting to be involved with the animals into other avenues that doesn't involve actually picking up an animal, because everybody listening knows how difficult it is to go to a show and not come home with something because it's so easy to convince yourself that you need it. So are you doing those interviews there live, or do you just collect them, record them, and then edit and post later?
Actually, what I do is I ask them to do them. I do some stuff there. I record some stuff there and I post it during the week. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I post a different thing each day at the show I've been at. And because here in Ohio, I have access to a show every week. I sometimes, like last weekend was 2 shows I could have gone to. This weekend is 2 or 3 shows within a 2-hour area. So 2-mile area, that'd be awful short. Within a 2-hour air distance. And I know that's a lot of dedication, but my wife and I like to drive. And so we go on a drive. We take a couple of our kids who are now getting older, but love reptiles, and we go to the shows. And that's kind of a weekend getaway for us. So that's what we do. And then I have them on. I have a Wednesday night show at 8:00, and I have people who I find interesting or are interested in being part of it. And I have them on for an hour or less, and we sit and we chat and we talk about different questions and what have you. And that's what we do.
Well, just thinking of even within a 2-hour distance from your home, for people who are listening, maybe in the States, that's not surprising. But for me as a Canadian, that's mind blowing to me that there's that many shows. There's 1 or 2 shows per year in my area. And that's it. Like the next one, I would have to travel hours. It would be maybe like an 8 or 9 hour drive to get to the next place where there might be a show. And that would be a one time a year as well. Like I can't even believe that there's that many reptile expos available to you.
Yeah. I mean, tomorrow, this weekend, there's one each day, and there's probably a couple on Saturday that I could go to. Now they're probably a little bit more than 2 hours away, but if I wanted to, I could go to different ones. So I could go to a different one every weekend for forever if I really wanted to.
Wow. So you do have like an endless amount of content. Yeah. And then as far as the show at 8:00, the live show, we are actually, you invited me to come on the show later. Now, by the time people are listening to this, our episode will have already aired because we're recording live. Obviously, this is not live. So maybe you could give people a little bit of information. Where can they go if they want to listen to the episode that I do with you or any other one?
Sure. Reptile Show Reporter Facebook group. And you can get on that and be part of that. It's on there. Sometimes I'll have it on the Chameleon Enthusiast as well. But I also have a YouTube channel, Reptile Show Reporter. And you could listen to them both. Instagram is not a great venue for an hour-long show, but I do have a way to get to all the different things from Instagram.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it later tonight as well. So that'll be fun, and chat with you and Bill. Well, why don't we get into the meat and potatoes of this conversation, the misting and the fogging. Mm-hmm. You had mentioned to me that you've used both misting and fogging for quite a long time with a kind of an array of species, and I think there's sort of 2 issues that I see with misting and fogging right off the top. The first is people. I think the main issue is how cool it looks when you do it, and I've mentioned this before, especially on the fogging side. There is this element of mysteriousness that comes by fogging, and people do love misting their enclosures because it does add some more depth visually when you do it. But we do have to remember that misting and fogging is primarily for the animal's hydration, and we can misutilize it and maybe make things too wet and too whatever. So why don't we just talk a little bit about I want to start with misting, but maybe in general, you could just quickly lay out what you've used misting for and how long you've done just misting in general.
I'd like to go back and start with, this is the way we get the animals hydrated.
Sure.
So there's multiple hydration methods. There's everything from a bowl that you put in the enclosure, which usually they poop in, you have to change all the time. And there's dripping, which either you put an ice cube or a dripper or something on top, and you just drip it into the thing because some animals need running water to see it. And that's the only way they're able to know that that's going to be there. And so they need running water. Then there's misting. Misting is when you kind of blow it into there with a nozzle, kind of like on the end of a hose, but it's a really tiny nozzle. And, dart frogs are probably a good example of where people have used those. I've actually had dart frogs too. I missed that one. But as we're going to go through this, I'll start to talk about those. But misting is good. But it's not is can I put this? Misting is compared to fogging are different amounts of stuff. So misting is a very light mist, but it's still rain. It's still dumping water on the animal. Fogging is you're converting water into a mist, a fog of some sort that's a little bit closer to a cloud than it is really being rained on. So the animals don't really feel like they're being rained on. Now, unfortunately, at one point I got into fogging, and I was fogging every cage I had a fogger on, and I had a whole basement full of cages with foggers on it. And 3 o'clock in the morning, I walked downstairs, and it was literally raining in my basement. The whole room. Now, granted, this basement is perfect because it's all block, it's concrete floor. The ceiling is painted so that it can't be ruined by water, and that was the way I got it. And so it was okay that it was raining, but I realized, boy, I need to tone down the fogging just a little bit here because this is way too much. But chameleons, which are what I mostly have fogged, but I fog all my other animals now too, need that kind of fogging at night because they get their hydration more at night than in the day. They actually don't drink from standing water. At least most of them don't. I mean, you can get some. There's some debate as to whether you're going to do that, train them to do anything. But that fog drops in on them, and instead of letting water out of their lungs when they breathe, we bring the water back in because the partial pressure of water is higher on the outside than the inside. So it actually that comes into them instead of going out of them. And that's how they hydrate themselves more than anything else. Now,
so just by the virtue of having drier air as they breathe, they're actually just removing water from their system. And if they're inhaling drier air, then slowly over the time, they're becoming more and more dehydrated.
But if you fog them during the night, mostly during the night, because chameleons don't do well with bright lights and fog, because most animals don't do well because that's a setup for disease, they get the water into them that way.
Yeah, so it is like you said. There's an important aspect of it is hydration. At the end of the day, that's what we're talking about, hydration. Right. But you can do it incorrectly, and it's not necessarily as simple as giving a water dish.
It's as simple as putting too many foggers up, and I've done it in multiple different ways. So, but you were asking about misting. Misting is, I use the Mist King system. Climist is also another system that's very, very much the same. It's almost identical. You can get, they're both about the same amount of money. I mist multiple cages with them. I have the bigger systems, and I mist all the cages. I'm misting my cages 2 to 3 times a day, depending on the season. It's different here in Ohio because we've got like 4 seasons. There's the winter when it's really dry in my basement because the heater is on and it's pulling the heat out of the moisture out of the air. Then there's the summer, which is the same because it's really dry because my air conditioner is running downstairs and it's air conditioning the house and it's pulling all the water out of the air and in the basement. So I have 2 sections of dry, and then in the spring and the fall, it's moist. So I don't have to do as much hydration. And so I'm always conscious about what time of year is it so that I can make sure that I keep my pets the right way. Now, you can be in, different areas of the country. Like Bill has in California, he's dry all the time pretty much. But it's so he needs to hydrate and provide misting and fogging all the time. But you have to make sure that you're doing it to and I make sure that I let everything dry out at some point during the day. So for the chameleons, it's like noon to 2ish in the afternoon. The whole cage dries out. And so nothing grows in the sense of mold or mildew. And it starts again, the fogging and the misting starts. The misting starts and then the fogging starts and goes through the night and what have you.
Can we talk a little bit just about the basic setup of the mister? So I think most people will be familiar with the Mist King. That's the system I have as well. And you'd mentioned one other one. But then just as far as like actually what you're doing, you have maybe you could talk about the reservoir and take it from there.
Starting with the reservoir. The reservoir is water. There's many debates about what water you use. I use reverse osmosis water. I also use spring water. That's the most natural water. If you use distilled water, you may theoretically endanger your pets because it might pull the solids out of them, and distilled water is not available really, even in nature. Even when you get rain, it's not distilled by the time it hits the ground, and so I'm not using that. I'm not using tap water because tap water varies from place to place, and I have the ability to do an RO, so I use RO. Do I have a good answer for why I don't use the tap water? Mostly because I'm worried about what's in there and my tap water, but it's safe. I could do it. And from time to time when I'm running behind, or the RO isn't keeping up, I will keep water overnight and use that water to put it, especially in the foggers, because the foggers, they aerosolize the air and send it out to what have you. But with the misters, I have actually a reservoir. So there's the.
Can I stop you just for 2 seconds? I
Sure.
just have a question about that. And for the distilled water, for people that are wondering what that is, there's that theory where when you drink distilled water, it kind of leaches the minerals back out of you into the water. So that could be an issue. And then as far as using spring water in the misters, do you not have any issue with the filter or with the screens or anything becoming clogged with minerals?
You can, but you have to use the right type of spring water.
Okay.
And I don't. And actually, the vast majority of my water is RO water, because I have my reservoir hooked up to a RO machine that it constantly provides water to my reservoir, because it's such a huge system. And I actually have a float that fills it back up. So it's almost never spring water, but that's what I used to use before.
How big is the reservoir? Is it just a giant barrel or
35 gallons?
Okay, so pretty big.
Yeah, so I use that one. I use one of those reservoirs for misting, and one of those reservoir, a 34-gallon for fogging, but we'll get to that later.
Okay.
So it goes from there. It goes to the pump, which is a pump that can run dry, and it pumps it goes by little 1/8 inch tubes to the pump, and it goes from the pump, and then the pump, there's a timer, and it has a seconds timer, so you can do 1 second worth of misting. You could do, I guess, unlimited number of hours of misting. You could just have it never turn off. So anything in the middle. But I usually use a minute or 2 minutes of misting and it depends on and I have different misters for different creatures. So, my chameleons as a whole probably mist all, the same, but other creatures get different things. So it goes from the pump to the mist head, which is a tiny little head. It's kind of like the end of a hose. It's it's fine in the way it sprays out, and it goes to all those. It gets to all of those things. It pressurizes itself up by pumping the water in, and all that mist comes out. And that's the end of it. Some of them have a return where it goes back to the pump and it shuts off immediately, but it stops it from dripping. But my idea is, if you're gonna fog, mist, and drip, which I do all three of them, why would you stop your mister from dripping? It's kind of one of those. It's like only a little bit of drip as it gets, so it doesn't make any sense to me why they did that. But I guess it's just for being better or what have you. But because the lower level Mist Kings don't actually have that drip retarding thing, so it's strange.
I was always confused by that as well, because I always saw the drip. You could add that thing to make it so it doesn't drip, and I always thought to myself, what dripping are they talking about? Because I would watch the Mist Kings finish, and then there'd be like 2 or 3 seconds of like couple drips coming out the nozzles, and I was thinking, like, is that the dripping that they're actually trying to stop? And I guess that is.
I guess so. I mean, that seems to be it. It just seems crazy.
Yeah, and I will say too, the Mist King system, obviously, when you look at the price tag, you're like, oh, that is kind of expensive. I tried to take the cheaper road once, and I ordered like a diaphragm pump off of Alibaba, and it took forever to come in. And when it did come in, this thing sounded like somebody was shooting a machine gun in my reptile room every time it went off. It was just so insanely loud and absurd. Like, people would come over to my house, and the misters would go off to be like, what's happening? Like, what's going on in that room? So I would say, because like the Mist King is a beautiful pump, and I'm sure the other one is as well, because it's so quiet. You can't even hear it. As long as you make sure you do a good job of fixing the hoses down so they're not rattling, it's very, very quiet.
Because there's pressure in the hoses, and when they fill up, they can rattle all over the place. But if you've actually fixed them, they don't rattle at all.
Yeah, absolutely. So you kind of mentioned the frequency and the time you run them. So maybe you could run through a couple examples. I think you said your chameleons and you have them attached to, like, are you using them for tortoises as well? And I guess they're on different intervals?
Yes. For tortoises, I just mist them once a day and give them a little mist and have them do that. For the chameleons, I mist right before the lights go on, for a couple minutes, and then I leave them off and I let it dry out. And then I mist around 5 o'clock when it's either spring or fall, when it's less moist. I miss at 5 o'clock as an afternoon shower. And then I missed after the lights go off at night. So I missed right before I start fogging, so that I put mist down on all the plants in the enclosures, and then the fogging starts, and it doesn't have to take over the plants. It can just fog the area.
Mm. And you said you normally run for about a minute?
A minute to 3 minutes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you always wonder, like, should you go like several short bursts throughout the day or a couple long bursts? I guess it also depends on like, as far as your drainage system in those enclosures, are you running like a bunch of soil, or are you running like just a bare bottom with a drain at the bottom? Because I know I've seen chameleon people do that with just potted plants.
A little bit of both.
Okay.
But all of my cages, I built most of my cages, or I had Bill especially build them for me, and they all have drainage in them, and the drainage goes down through it. So whatever I put in there, it goes through it, and it comes out somewhere. So, it's, even if it's a soil, it's still moist in there, and the top dries out during the day. And so it's not an issue for me. Used to be, I started out with drainage and I did all kinds of different things, but I ended up putting just I took an actual drain that you would put on the top of something, and I screwed it to the bottom of my cage, so that it didn't even have a lip to have extra drainage. And it would just go down, and it would come out, and then it would go out the end. And sometimes some of them I have buckets under that I empty, which I got tired of doing because I got so many buckets. And so then I just piped it all down the drain.
Yeah. See, that's like my dream of having a system where you have the misting happening, you have piping going out the system, going down a drain at the end, and it's very hands off. There's some danger with things being so hands off, because then you start to be more disengaged with the enclosures. Yes. But it gives you that freedom of if you're going to go for a weekend, things are taken care of.
That happened to me because I had the float to let the thing fill up. So then, since I wasn't actually there while it was misting, I didn't know that the timer had shut off. I accidentally shut the timer off, and it wasn't misting. And so it took me a couple of days to figure out the cages don't seem damp at all. And so I had to. So I then I used to just turn off the float valve. I have a valve that turns it off, so it actually goes down a little bit, and then I turn it back on and let it go back up. And then I get a few days, it goes down again. And so that way it's automated, but it's not completely automated. Because too automated is you need to spend that extra time that you get from the automation checking your stuff to make sure it's working, instead of just taking that off, because that doesn't work that way. Unfortunately, there's nothing that does that does it well, if you want to keep your creatures alive.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, the time that you save with full automation, you end up losing anyway, going back through things to make sure that the automation is working.
But you know what? I actually enjoy just misting. I don't, going from cage to cage, just misting things. So I'm able to actually spend more time looking at the cages, watching the behaviors. So it is actually good, but it's just a different kind of perspective for a way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And are there any other areas that you can think that mistakes that you see people make with misters that you see online or anything? I mean, the only one I can think of is like not having proper drainage, or forgetting about them. But is there any other
when
ones
they set them up, if they don't push them all the way in? Pushing them in, there's a push, and then once you get the feel, you'll understand it. But it's just a little bit further than you expect it to go, and making sure that you put enough between the different spots to actually make it to the connections, and not make connections too tight. In the sense of not too tight, but too close, too far apart, and then not be able to stretch the hose between the two of them and try to overstretch, because you end up having holes. And then when you change anything, turn it on, watch it.
Yeah.
Don't go up to bed and go and come down the next night and find a room full of water, especially when you have something that's filling your tank automatically. You could rain on the room all night and not have anyone checking on it. So you need to make sure that all your connections are good before every time you make a change or an update. So I don't do that often anymore. I always try to update to the end, so I know that the whole thing of the rest of it's good. But it can be a challenge.
Yeah. And since you have different intervals for different species, like groups of species, we'll say, and you have the 135-gallon reservoir, do you have more? I guess you have more than one pump drawing off that reservoir? I have more than one
pump out of the reservoir, yes.
Okay, so you've just drilled to the bottom. When you buy a Miskin, it gives you a little bulkhead.
I put a bulkhead in the bottom, and I put it on, and they come, they used to come with reservoirs. back 25 years ago when you bought a Miss King, you got a reservoir with it. But now I found them online where you could find the reservoirs that they used to send, and I got those. But now I go to Home Depot and I get a reservoir and I put the bulkhead in it and do my thing. I used to be concerned about putting them all on one thing, but then it's all your ducks in one pond. But then I got tired of cleaning out all the reservoirs and replacing them and doing it. So I just have a couple of reservoirs that I clean out regularly. I have one in that's ready to go if the one gets a little I don't know. Sometimes the light causes them to grow a little bit of algae in them, and so even though algae would be a good scrubber for quality for fish tanks, it's not really a good thing for your reptiles to have an algae bed being blown into their water. So at least I don't even know. It might be great, but it's creating air in there. But I just switch them out.
Yeah, that's another really good point too. Is that can be another fault of being over automated, is you kind of forget, because you don't necessarily have to clean it for the system to continue to function, but if you can get into a pattern of not cleaning, and then because I've seen like a little bit of slime build up on the walls, these like just a coat build up on the inside of your reservoir. It's like, okay, time to rinse that out and put a fresh one in. So if you have one ready to go, you can just do a quick swap.
Yep. Over time, you learn these things. You're like, oh, what am I going to do? How am I going to do this? I can't bleach this and have it ready. Then you're like, okay, I need 2 of these. Yeah. It's just so much easier to switch one out, and then while you have leisure time, you can clean the other one and what have you. So.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that makes sense. I think that covers misting. I think misting is something that's more commonly used and relatively simple for people to do, but I think we definitely gave some good points there as far as setting it up and taking care of it properly. Fogging is the interesting one. I've watched over the years of me being in the hobby, I've watched fogging go from, everybody's fogging. You see, videos of people keeping like green tree pythons and emerald tree boas, just fogging them like crazy, like it's a nightclub throughout the day. And then I watched it completely stop because people realized, wow, there's respiratory infections, and they would blame the fogger, so nobody was fogging anymore. And now I'm starting, in the last 5 or 6 years, you start seeing them being used more effectively in the way that I think you're about to describe. I think, and now you're starting to see brands and whatnot selling reptile specific foggers, where before you had to kind of buy your own ultrasonic fogger. But one of the issues is there's no good system to do it for a large amount of enclosures. Now, the like we said, the Miss King, you can miss 10 enclosures at once with a single system, but are you really going to go spend $100 on a fogger for each enclosure? It's a bit confusing. So maybe first, before we get into sort of the DIY of how to create a big fogger, is maybe you could you'd already mentioned it, but we reiterate how to use them properly. So I think the biggest thing is not during the day or not overly using them during the day. Maybe you could run with that. It depends
on what pet you have. So it depends on, certain pets can tolerate all kinds of moisture, others cannot. You also have to make sure that whatever you do, that you give it a break, that you allow the nature to dry things out, because all over the world, nature, even in the most wet areas, it gets dry really quick. And so you have to let them dry out. So whether it's during the night or during the day, you need to make sure you're taking care of your pet the way it should be taken care of. But chameleons, for example, need to be fogged at night, probably, preferably. That's at least what we're doing at this point in history and what have you. But so whatever you do, make sure that you give it time to dry out. Make sure that whatever you're using to fog with, that all the pipes dry out and don't get full of I guess that's some kind of green slime that happens at different things when you get things wet and you don't let them dry.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. And I think, if you're running them during the day, like so, you should know the species. And the easiest thing to do is look at the weather patterns of the area. If you're seeing big humidity spikes during the night, that's probably a good time to use it. It can. I think just making sure you have proper ventilation as well. That's the one mistake I see people make, is that you can't even see the animal because the fog is just building up in there and it has nowhere to go. Do you use fans or anything to blow the fog through? Okay.
I use hybrid cages for most of my things. So the hybrid cage it has plastic or plexiglass sides to it, but it always has a screen top or some type of top that has holes in it that doesn't let the animal through, and some screen thing in the front. So usually it's the screen base and a glass top, so you can see the animal really well through the glass, and then the screen base creates the chimney effect, so it pulls the air through and what have you. I also keep a fan going in my room all the time. And so they're creatures who, my tortoises are in just pens, so they don't have a top or what have you, so they just get fog. The whole room, the fog that comes from the rest of the room is good for them. My first redfoot, which we had 10 years ago, which was the only one I didn't get as a rescue, actually has no pyramiding on him, because he was in a chameleon room, and we got all kinds of fog and all kinds of moisture and humidity during the night. I was a little worried that was the wrong thing to do, but it ended up being exactly the right thing to do. Now that I have all these other rescue tortoises, they all had some pyramiding as they were growing up because people didn't give them enough moisture. But that can be the difference there.
Yeah, that's true. You can kind of utilize the fog from the enclosure next to it to sort of bump the relative humidity of the room up. So let's talk about building your own DIY fogger. As I said, the Mist King is a perfect thing, or any other mister, because you can pipe the mist right into a bunch of enclosures at once. But you don't want to go around and buy even an $80 fogger for each enclosure. If you have, more than a couple enclosures, it becomes expensive. So can you walk us through how you've created your own fogging system that can hit many enclosures at once?
Let's start with let's just quickly go down the path. I started with foggers. I actually don't use the ones that are the foggers that are made for foggers. I use from Amazon, essentially. I use the brands that are Cool Mist humidifiers, and I put a pipe from them into the cages. And it's usually 3/4 inch pipe. And there used to be a bunch of them you could buy. Even Amazon's brand had actually fit the 3/4 inch pipe. You could just put it in and good to go. But now you have to do a bunch of different 1.5 inch, 1.25 inch, whatever, down to the 3/4 inch pipe. But that's what I was doing for 1 to 3 cages, even 5 cages I've done before with a single Cool Mist humidifier. And that's all I used. And, they would last a year and you'd replace them. Unfortunately, I started telling people on the Chameleon Enthusiast what I was using, and they just went out of stock. And people kept talking about how great they were. And I can't blame me necessarily, but it just seems like me and whoever else was telling everybody else started selling these and buying these things. So you have to keep every year. I have to research it and figure out which ones are doing it. So I decided at this point, then I've got all these cages. I need to fog them all. I don't want to fog the room as a whole, because that's too imprecise. So I want to make sure there's fog blowing into each cage. So then that's when I decided to create one. So I decided to look it up. I looked on the internet, I looked it up what other people had done. And there's a bunch of examples on the internet how to do it. House of Hydro is a good place to go to get a fogger, or the whole fogging mechanism. And what I did is I went to House of Hydro. I bought a 12 disc thing, which was way overkill, even for my 2,000 square foot basement. The 12 disc is just way. I had to turn it down about to 1/4 of its capability.
So that's basically like anybody that's seen an ultrasonic fogger. They have the 1 disc normally. Yeah, so this would be
one disc, and I had
board with 12
of them. But the 12 was not that much more expensive than the 1. So I'm like, do I get 6? Do I get 4? 6 is always out of stock. Do I get whatever? And I figured, just go with 12. And there's a device for it to turn it down, so I could turn it down as far as I needed to, and I wouldn't be short. So that's what I did. I got that. You get the same kind of container from Home Depot. You drill 2 holes in the top. 1 hole is for the fog to come out, and you can buy it from them, or you can get your own. You just have to have a hole that sends the fog out. This is like a 4-inch pipe, and it goes to different pipes, and you have to make sure that you're going up, each time until you get to the final part where it's just dripping and dropping down. And you do that to each different section that you're at. And then that's where the fog goes. You get the fogging system itself, the ultrasonic fogger. It floats. You get it on a float. It floats in the water. It floats in the reservoir. So you have to set your reservoir somewhere where it's going to not dry out and not be overflowed, because it won't have enough room to fog. And then you've got a fan on, which is the most important thing. They sell waterproof fans that blow in, not out. You blow it in. So that it comes out the other end.
So you're pushing air into the reservoir that will push the fog out the other pipe,
so that the fog comes out. And you have to seal the reservoir. All I did was screw it together. I didn't have to do any actual sealing, because I just got a box. I got a 35-gallon container from Home Depot, and I put it together. And I actually think I did a video on it, or at least I did a couple videos on it. And I did a whole episode with Bill Strand on fogging as well. So
Now, if I'm remembering that box, those are the ones with like it's a black box with the yellow lid, right? Is that the one we're talking about? It's like a tote. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, they make them in white clear, which is a bad idea because then you get that whole you get the light in and it makes it turn green and what have you. But yes, it's a and you can get them in any size. But I went with a 35 gallon. Why? I don't know. That's just what happened to be the one I went to. Yes, 35 gallons, right? And I did it with that, and it seems to do very well. It's currently fogging couple dozen cages.
Okay, so it's doing a lot for you.
And there's room for more because I'm only using like 25% of its capacity, and I'm fogging some empty stuff and what have you, just because I've set it up. But I built it that way. I took the 4-inch pipe. I went down to 2-inch pipe, and then I went down to 3/4-inch pipe I went down to 2-inch pipe along the sides, and then I went from the sides down into each cage with 3/4-inch pipe again.
Okay, so the reason that you have it dialed back to, like, if you ran it at 100%, would it just be pumping way too much fog into the enclosures?
The whole room would fog up, and maybe my house.
Okay, yes, okay, that makes sense.
Right. And I have it on a timer, so it goes on and off. That I also had to figure out because I actually stepped into the timer. I found I was able to kick the timer, and it wasn't the timer. It was a machine that it was part of the timer, and I turned it off one night, and I was like, why is it not fogging? But since I fog from like 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., I don't usually see it fogged. So I just have to figure out that the cages were extra dry, and I'm like, oh, this is not a good thing. So you need to be very aware of your room and what things should look like, how plants should be behaving, how creatures should be behaving, what dehydration looks like to do these kind of automated things, because automation just makes it easier. It doesn't make it foolproof.
Yes, that's a good point. And so you actually do fog the entire evening, hey?
Yes.
Okay, that's interesting.
I actually do. Some people do a couple hours, an hour on, an hour off, an hour on. But because I'm fogging at such a low level, I'm not one of those people who think that, of course, I'm doing with misting, but that fogging for an hour, then unfogging, and not fogging for an hour, and that just, to me, doesn't make any sense. Why don't you fog at half the rate for full time, or a quarter of the rate for whatever it is, and just let it be? That's the fog, because it's not really like nature doesn't bring in a cloud, and for an hour then stop, and then an hour then stop. It nature, just the fog rolls in, and then it rolls out, and right. That's the way I'm doing it. Do
you mist at all during the night as well to facilitate the kind of the wetness?
I mist just before the fog starts, to facilitate dampness there, and then I mist first thing in the morning to help with the more, supposedly it's the morning dew. Now, when I do baby cages, I just fog them. I don't even mist them. I just fog the baby cages. The fog is enough of a drip from it that in the morning it's dripping into the cage. So there's a quote mist / dripping into it, and there's a fogging, and that's enough for the baby chameleons.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see people experiment with other species if they can accomplish something effective during the day. But I think for most species, I feel like with most, especially tropical species, which I guess is really the only time you'd be using fogging, I'm not sure you would use it in an arid setting. Nighttime is when we see a big boost in humidity. As soon as the sun sets, the humidity just explodes because the sun's not evaporating the moisture. So I think as a rule of thumb, that's really good. And
it's not as cool look. You don't get to
experience
lights aren't
it.
On, you don't see the fog. It's not like a Star Wars kind of thing,
Yeah.
But it's it's the right thing to do for the animal.
Yeah, absolutely. And you had mentioned that when you have the piping, you want to make sure that the piping is always going up, like vertically, until you enter the cage. Is it because if you start running pipe in a downward direction, you end up pooling water, or?
Yeah, it's because the pipe, it won't go up because the fog goes up because of the way it rises. And
the fog won't even come up. Okay. There's nowhere.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense. And then you had mentioned the water level. I assume you have a float in that tank as well to keep the water level at an appropriate place.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Without the float system, would that system work? Because it seems like you have to have a pretty fine-tuned water level for the fog to run.
Depending on how big the reservoir is, it's depending on how much you're going to use. I only use a few gallons a night. So out of a 35-gallon thing, only a couple of gallons is going into the fog. So it's not moving that much. And I went almost a week without having to refill without my float before I put
Okay.
the float in. So, it's you have to have a big enough reservoir. You have to plan ahead.
Yeah.
You always think you're planning ahead. But always get twice as big and then double that.
Yeah, exactly. But if you had a large reservoir,
Mhm.
and for example, for me, if I do want to implement fogging into this room eventually, I'll be only fogging like 3 or 4 enclosures.
Mhm.
That's not something I'm gonna have to fill every night. Essentially, it could run for a
Right.
couple weeks
No,
before
not at
having to
all.
do it again.
In fact, if I was just fogging 3 or 4 enclosures, I probably wouldn't get a big thing. I'd just get a thing from Amazon and pipe it to 4 different enclosures.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and actually, on that, I want to get back to the House of Hydro as well, but just on that note of buying an Amazon fogger, something that I've learned from buying those foggers, and I think in Canada there are things that are less available, which can be kind of a pain, but I think these are the things that I've learned from buying those foggers, and maybe you can chip in if you've learned anything as well. There are certain foggers where they'll have a dial setting,
Mhm.
and you can leave it on at a certain point, and those
Yes.
are the ones you want. I have bought some in the past that are an on button, and as soon as you turn it off, it doesn't come back on.
Right, unless someone physically turns it on, right? Yeah, so
Exactly.
you
So
have
even
to
if the
very
power,
much look at them to make
yes,
sure there's not electronic, that it's an actual digital control, that you actually turn it on and put it in a setting and leave it, and when it turns on and off. And that's also important because you also need to make sure your timers work like that.
right.
Because if the power goes out and it comes back on, your timers are reset. Unless you have timers that actually reset themselves and stay the way they are. And so the Mist King does that. And all my timers that I'm using for the fogging system, I actually have plugins that have battery backup on them. So they keep
Yes.
the time. So they know what time it is. So it's not and you can get those from the same type of locations, Amazon or whatever.
Yeah.
But you can get those, and those actually work so much better than actually having to reset all your timers to the right time frame and what have you. I mean,
Yes.
twice a year here in Ohio, we have to reset them because
Yeah.
I stopped doing that. I gave up on having to reset everything. Everything's off an hour for half the year. But
Yeah, yeah, same with me. My animals don't experience daylight savings time. It doesn't matter to them. I mean, it's the same amount of time. So, but yeah,
right.
it's good. It's a good point. The digital timers are really good for that. The digital outlet timers, because they do have the battery, and when the power goes out, the battery won't die. I'm not sure how long those batteries last for, but probably several hours before, or maybe
Actually,
it's I don't
several
even know.
days.
Yeah, maybe
Actually,
several
haven't
days.
left for several days. They're
Okay,
not running the power. They're not powering anything. They're just running the
internal
memory
clock.
of the clock so that it knows what time it is. It's all it's
Yes.
running.
Yeah, and yeah, like you said, you're not going around. And actually, I like those ones better. And actually, it's funny because earlier today I picked up another 2 off of Amazon because one of my timers is the old school kind of dial ones. And when those run for a couple of years, they start to grind like and I hate that sound so much. And that's why I like the digital ones; they're just very quiet. Now, for the House of Hydro, the disc system do you have any? Is there any safety concerns with that setup for you? Do you think that, like, do you ever worry? I don't know what it would be, kind of knock on wood, but like,
I've heard people say things that when you're running water and electricity in the same area, but I don't actually put my lights are in a different spot and they're always above. And my power cords come from above and my water goes from below. And so there's always a space between the two of those.
okay,
And so there's never really a place where the two are going to meet. Um, um, I'm sure not everybody has that availability, but you can always, as long as you put a cord so that it goes down and it comes back up before it goes into anything important, then you have a drip point where things don't actually get into, the water doesn't stay, it drips off it before it runs into the outlet or what have you.
hmm yeah, exactly. Yeah, anybody has had an aquarium has plugged in things like that with the loop just to make sure you're not flowing water directly into an electrical outlet or anything like that.
Which is bad for both you and the animals.
Yes, yeah, that will be an expensive bill, not ideal. And so I think that is, it's an interesting to miss or to fog the entire night. I think that as long as you do have good ventilation, that is a totally fine to do. I think people need to watch. Even something like an Exoterra does not have that much ventilation.
No,
It has
not at
great
all.
ventilation at the top. They actually don't hold that much humidity because of that. But
Right.
the
I made a mistake with my Exoterras. I was fogging those, and you have to fog for 10 minutes and then let it go off for most of the night, and then back 10 more minutes and something like that, because it does not have any circulation or air.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, you had mentioned that you have a fan in your room. Is that just a like a stand in, like a fan like sitting on the ground that's just oscillating throughout the room?
Actually, it's a fan on a stand that's in the top third of the room, blowing across the room. That's usually what it is. It's just blowing, and so it creates a little bit of wind in the room.
Yeah, because airflow is key when you're dealing with moisture. Obviously, that's a really important point.
And I did the upper fan because the cages all have tops that are near this to the top, so I'm blowing the air across the top. So I'm not only getting rid of the moisture, but I'm moving air all day long. So it's not just doing it during the same time. So that if you have it blowing in the middle of the room, and you have these hybrid type cages, you may not be blowing it anywhere near the cages. You're not really moving air.
Right. Yeah. Good point. Is there anything else about fogging or fogging systems that you wanted to mention, or any mistakes that you see people make? I think we've mentioned a few of them. The other thing I wanted to mention with purchasing your own like an Amazon humidifier, ultrasonic humidifier, is just making sure that you're buying one that does have an easy to use, like you can modify it in an easy way to add piping. Like some of them you have to like unplug and turn upside down, and it's a whole thing.
No, the better ones are the ones you could take the top off. You don't have to remove the water the fogging system and do it. But I actually think that's you can put it that, and even in the foggers are like that. You can pour them into the fogging, but I think it's actually better to remove the fogging apparatus and set it down somewhere else so the water all drains out of it, and then you put it back in. And so you remember to do that every couple of days when you fill it up. And so it actually gets the water new, gets rid of the old water, and it doesn't leave anything in there.
Like water in the pipes and everything.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then for the water for that, you're using your RO as well?
I'm using a little bit of RO, and I'm also using tap water that's been kept out overnight.
Okay. Just to allow the chlorine to evaporate.
Right.
Yeah. Because I guess if
I have gallon pitchers that I fill every day just so I have them.
So you got water all over the place.
Yes. But like I said, it's a basement. It's block. It's a concrete floor. It's perfect.
Yeah, that's ideal. I love my concrete floor in the basement. I spill water on down here all the time, and I just have like an indoor-outdoor carpet, and it dries so fast because the concrete just like absorbs it, or dries it really quickly. So having concrete in a basement for reptiles is definitely beneficial. Are there any other things that you wanted to mention about fogging? I think we covered most things, and I feel like that.
I think that's about it. I mean, if anyone wants to ask me about fogging, I'm available. You can reach me in different ways. I'm on Instagram, both under McZoo Exotics and Reptile Show Reporter. I'm on Facebook in multiple groups. I actually lead a couple groups. The Reptile Show Reporter group is one of them. I'm also on YouTube. I don't get a lot of business, I guess, conversation at YouTube because my shows go live there, but that's all I have. It's content there. So that's probably my last place to look during the day. But I have emails. I have Sean at McZoo Exotics and Sean at Reptile Show Reporter. I look at those every day. So if you send me an email, I'll answer it. It maybe take me a while if it's, a day where I'm busy and doing my real job, but I'm happy to talk with anyone about anything. Do I have the answer? Probably, maybe. But if I don't have the answer, I'm also someone who will not tell you just anything. I will not, make something up. I will actually tell you I don't know. And I'll either send you the right people or tell you at least don't ask me that anymore, because that I don't know. Because I feel that people, they make this stuff up, and they're like, and then it gets like into the literature, or the I guess not the literature, but the magazines, and people are making this stuff up, and you're like, you don't even have a sound reason for all this stuff. But
yes, we have myths and things that just come out of nowhere, and then they take hold.
They build, and it's like strange. Like these myths, they expand and they build quite faster and faster than the real truth, because the truth is boring.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Totally true. Well, Sean, this was great. I really enjoyed this. And as you said, if people do have further questions, they can touch base with you and ask you some more deeper questions. But as I said through the intro, I really want to give people just a quick, simple episode to aid them in this area, because hydration is so important, and that really is, if you talk to any exotic vet, is one of the leading causes of reptile health issues, is kidney issues from being dehydrated, because people are not hydrating their animals appropriately. And I think misting and fogging is really key to do that, especially the fogging during the night, and to give people some tools to access that, to make it a little more simple. Because, that's, like I said earlier in the show, that is one of those myths. Fogging causes respiratory infections, so people don't do it. And then they have a dehydrated animal with kidney disease because they think that the fogging causes other problems. So there are ways to do things properly and to make sure the animals are happy and healthy. So thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really enjoyed this. And as we said earlier, I'm also jumping on your live stream in about half an hour, so we'll be doing that. So for anybody listening right now, they should go back to Sean's content so you can listen to that. But until then, thank you so much. This was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
All right, that is the end of that episode. Sean, thank you so much for joining me. As I said, it was one of my goals this year to do more instructional type content and more prescriptive content for people to follow, and I think we nailed that. I think you really laid out a good picture of how to utilize both misting and fogging. And for those of you who are in a situation like me where you don't have a ton of animals, we can set up a smaller fogging operation. Or for those of you who have a large amount of a large amount of enclosures that you need to fog inside one room, then maybe moving towards that House of Hydro, multi-unit or multi-disc unit will be something that you could implement to increase the fog in your enclosure, or the humidity in your enclosure. Like we said, there's many ways to do this wrong, and at the same time, we are dealing with this sort of pandemic of dehydrated reptiles. So anything we can do to help provide fresh, good water for our animals in captivity is, we don't want to overlook that. It is super important. If you're looking for more information on this episode, make sure you head to animalsathomenetwork.com. If you enjoyed this episode and you want to support the podcast, share it on social media. That is really the easiest way to help support the podcast. If you want to take it to the next level, the way you can support the podcast is by going to patreon.com/animalsathome and becoming a patron. There's a bunch of bonuses there. If you do become a patron, you get early access to episodes, the opportunity to submit questions to upcoming guests and whatnot. But of course, the most important piece is helping me pay for the production of the show, which I'm greatly appreciative of everybody who is part of the Patreon group. And thank you so much to Custom Reptile Habitats for sponsoring this podcast. You can find more information about them in the affiliate links in both the YouTube description and the show notes. If you do purchase an enclosure or a piece of equipment through that link, a commission comes back to me at no extra cost to you. And of course, that is a huge benefit to me and to you because you're getting a new piece of high quality reptile related equipment. That is it for this episode. I will see you guys in the next one.